Democracy, African democracy. This is a map from Unesan's book. So the colors actually mean green is a full democracy. Yes, so dark green is a full democracy. There is zero. There are no full democracy.
No country.
No country.
Wow.
That's.
But Tunisia is
Yes.
democracy?
Yeah.
Oh.
So they actually, after the Arab Spring, Tunisia became a democracy. That's the only country actually that the basic.
I can see above the country, Botswana. What's the name of the country? Brown.
Zimbabwe.
Oh, Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe obviously is not a democracy. Robert Mugabe has been in charge there for I don't know how long. I think actually he lost it, didn't he?
Mnangagwa now is the president. Mnangagwa.
So
He's also same as Zimbabwe.
as Mugabe. Yeah.
Mugabe.
A terrible leader.
You know that? Okay.
But I must say that actually, when I visited Zimbabwe, it was not that poor.
Oh.
That was in 1995. 1995. I visited Zimbabwe, and the country was rather prosperous, especially in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. It was kind of affluent. The influence of English investment, infrastructure, etc., was still visible. The infrastructure was good, and there were quite a lot of farmers there, wealthy farmers who were growing roses, who were making good money. But since then, it has been terribly deteriorating through mismanagement of Mugabe, who didn't want to give up on power. Mugabe being a freedom fighter who basically liberated Zimbabwe from the British, got popular support, and a lot of hopes were on him. But being a liberator doesn't necessarily mean that you are a good and what's it called, how do you call it in Confucianism, a benevolent ruler. I believe that Mugabe, his reign started to deteriorate, just like so many leaders in Africa. Sometimes they start out as being so enlightened and so benevolent, but many of them, they're facing the reality once they start to rule the country. They realize that if they don't keep a firm grip on the country, then it could escalate and get into a civil war situation. So to immediately implement democracy is very challenging. So what happens if these rulers, they feel like, oh yeah, I need to be the ruler here for a little bit longer, but then they get so much entrenched within their position that they feel that they cannot let go of power anymore. And it doesn't only happen in Zimbabwe or in Uganda, but also in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, especially Eritrea. Also, they had a kind of a high-level Oxford graduated president, and but they cannot. Basically, all of them they do not seem to be able to transform these countries into democracies. Either they cannot or they don't want to. But there is something there. I mean, it's not a coincidence that so many inspired leaders failed to actually transform their countries. So looking at these countries, there's only one failed state on here, that is Somalia. I would argue that maybe Congo should also be a little bit more red than it is on this map. Angola has stabilized, but it's what is surprising to me is actually Mozambique, which is rather light colored. But when I visited them, it was very close to a failed state. It was definitely lawless and quite dangerous to travel there. But it has improved since then. So again, here the story is that we see a lot of states that are that not very democratic. South Africa, thanks to very strong leadership, has become green. Namibia, Botswana are green. These countries are currently struggling with HIV, but they were really completely different from the rest of Africa that I visited. So when I traveled,
Where is Namibia?
Namibia here.
Oh, okay.
So Namibia is quite rich, and South Africa was also quite rich. Botswana was actually very rich, very small population, but very rich, and quite expensive to travel actually. So I didn't spend too long there, but beautiful country with lots of wildlife, lots of elephant, yeah, and quite stable. Namibia and I think also Botswana have been German colonies, and I think actually that there is a slight correlation between who has been the colonial power and the state of the country at the moment. Like if we look at the former Portuguese colonies like Angola and Mozambique, they did terrible after they became independent, and which is probably also due to the nature of the rulers. Like the weaker the rulers, the more they rely on the principles of divide and rule, which means that they are going to use a minority to take control over the majority. Congo is the same story. The Belgian rule there was terrible. They really practically ruined the country. Why? Probably because it was Belgium is such a small country, so that they would not have enough power to effectively rule it if they could actually side with one of the two. One of the factions and try to use their power and give them the opportunity to suppress the rest, knowing very well that this would divide the country. So after the Belgians left Congo, it was very difficult to restabilize that country. We saw the same thing in Rwanda. Yeah, what we are seeing right now is not so surprising if we look at the history.